At noon on October 11, 1923, Southern Pacific Train 13 stood at Tunnel 13 in the Siskiyou Mountains. 3 railway employees and a postal clerk were dead. The mail car was damaged, and the men responsible had escaped into the Oregon woods. Among the objects recovered during the search was a pair of work overalls. To most eyes, the garment carried only stains, dust, and the remains of hard use. To Edward Oscar Heinrich, it carried a biography. Fibers suggested an occupation. Wear suggested a body. A paper scrap pressed deep inside a narrow pocket pointed toward a name. How could a discarded piece of clothing identify 3 brothers who had vanished? And what part of that celebrated deduction can the surviving record actually prove? Edward Oscar Heinrich was born in Clintonville, Wisconsin, on April 20, 1881. His family moved west to Tacoma, Washington, while he was a child. When his father died during Heinrich's teenage years, the household lost its provider. Heinrich trained in pharmacy and passed the Washington State examination at 18. The work gave him an early education in measurement, compounds, contamination, and the discipline of written formulas. It also gave him a profession before he possessed the conventional schooling expected of a university student. He had no high school diploma when he sought admission to the University of California. In 1904, after petitioning the institution, he entered with special standing. The pattern was already visible, where formal structures were closed or incomplete. Heinrich built a route through evidence, study, and persistence. Heinrich graduated from the University of California in 1908 with a degree in chemistry. That year, he married Marian Allen, an education student he had met in Berkeley. They would have 2 sons. His early public appointments took him through municipal chemistry and administration in Tacoma, Olinda, and Boulder. By 1919, he had returned to Berkeley and established a private crime laboratory in the basement of his home on Oxford Street. He also taught criminology during the university's summer sessions. American policing then had few shared laboratory standards and limited scientific capacity. Heinrich offered chemical analysis, microscopy, photography, and document examination to lawyers and public agencies that usually lacked those tools. San Francisco directories later described him plainly as a legal chemist and microscopist. The press would choose a more theatrical name. The laboratory's routine was less romantic than its reputation. Heinrich's surviving work diaries record appointments, tests, correspondence, and overlapping case numbers. Archivists found that handwriting and typewriting examination formed much of his business. He photographed disputed characters, enlarged them, cut them apart, and compared their forms. Other assignments brought ink, fibers, firearms, soil, and stains beneath his lenses. In a busy month, the papers indicate that he might handle 30 or 40 matters, many involving suspected fraud or forgery rather than headline crime. This volume mattered. Pattern recognition came from repeated, documented observation, but so did the risk of confidence outrunning proof. Heinrich's strength was his insistence that ordinary objects could be witnesses. His enduring question was not whether an object looked important. It was what measurable history the object had retained. The case that fixed Heinrich in public memory began with Southern Pacific Train 13 at Tunnel 13 in southern Oregon. Brothers Roy, Ray, and Hugh d'Outremont intended to rob its mail car. Their attempt failed. Railway workers Sidney L. Bates, Charles O. Johnson, and Marvin B. Sang were killed, as was railway postal clerk Eldon E. Doty. No known fortune was carried away. The investigation immediately crossed jurisdictions because the scene involved a railroad, the United States Mail, and local territory. Jackson County officers worked beside Southern Pacific special agents and postal inspectors. Charles Riddyford, the postal inspector in charge at Spokane, led the federal effort. Searchers moved through steep country around the tunnel while officials issued notices asking the public for information. At first, those notices contained no names. The case had victims, objects, and a direction of flight, but no identified suspects. Evidence came from the damaged train, the ground around the tunnel, and a small cabin found in the woods near the attack. Investigators recovered equipment and debris associated with the attempt, including a detonator, a firearm, a travel bag, and the overalls. A dark mark on the clothing appeared at first to be grease, an interpretation that suggested a mechanic. Heinrich examined the garment as a collection of separate environments. Seams trapped material that the surface had lost. Pockets preserved what hands and work had deposited. The size and wear of the cloth could support a cautious estimate of the wearer. Most importantly, the cabin and its contents could be compared with purchase records, handwriting, and postal documents. Heinrich was not replacing the investigators. He was turning their recovered objects into leads they could test. Under magnification, the supposed grease proved to be tree pitch. Heinrich identified dub as fur material in the sawdust and plant debris held by the garment. Hair and the dimensions of the overalls contributed to a physical description. From these observations, he reported that investigators should look for a young lumber worker connected to the Pacific Northwest. Later accounts made memorable claims about handedness and personal habits, but the secure center of the analysis was simpler. The garment carried traces of forestry work, not machine work. Then Heinrich searched the narrow pencil pocket. Inside was a washed, crumpled scrap of paper. Treatment with iodine vapor made enough of the faded writing visible for a number to be read. The strongest clue in the celebrated profile was not a deduction at all. It was a recoverable postal record. Postal inspectors traced the number to a registered mailing connected to Roy de Autremont, who had sent $50 to family in New Mexico. A name now joined the physical evidence. Records and family information showed that Roy and his brothers had worked as lumbermen, and all three were missing. Investigators also examined the firearm cabin material, purchase records, shipping information, and handwriting. The result was not a single miraculous revelation. It was a chain in which one legible number connected an anonymous garment to a known person, and the surrounding evidence connected that person to two brothers in a prepared hideout. On October 21, 10 days after the crime, the Post Office Department and Southern Pacific issued the first wide circular in the series to name Roy, Ray, and Hugh de Autremont. Heinrich had helped identify the quarry. Finding them would be another problem. The brothers had disappeared before officials could reach them. The investigation therefore became the contest between mobility and paper. Across 4 years, the Post Office Department distributed more than 2,450,000 circulars. Editions appeared in several languages and traveled through the United States, Canada, Latin America, and Europe. The photographs moved through post offices, police departments, and military stations. By April 1926, the advertised reward had risen to $15,900. Tips produced false trails as well as useful memories, and the files grew. The scale can obscure what the system was doing. Heinrich's laboratory had reduced a wilderness search to 3 names. The Postal Service then placed those names and faces where ordinary clerks, soldiers, and acquaintances might encounter them. The man-hunt depended upon repetition. A poster seen once could be forgotten. A poster circulated for years could wait for recognition. The first break came far from Oregon. Hugh de Autremont had enlisted in the United States Army under the alias James C. Price and was serving in the Philippines. Corporal Thomas Reynolds recognized him from a wanted poster displayed at a post office. Army and postal records then allowed officials to compare identities and handwriting. Hugh was apprehended in Manila on February 11, 1927, and returned to the United States. His capture renewed newspaper attention and brought the twins' photographs before the public again. This was the second half of the forensic process. Laboratory evidence could establish a persuasive identity, but it could not search every barracks or town. The circular supplied the memory aid, Reynolds supplied the observation, and officials supplied the documentary confirmation. Nearly 4 years after the overalls entered Heinrich's laboratory, the first brother was in custody. Ray and Roy had been living under the names Elmer and Clarence Goodwin. Albert Collingsworth, who knew them by those names, recognized the faces brought back into circulation after Hugh's arrest. The twins were taken into custody in Steubenville, Ohio, on June 9, 1927. Their cases returned to Jackson County, Oregon. On June 23, after an earlier mistrial caused by a juror's death, a jury found Hugh guilty of first-degree murder and fixed his punishment at life imprisonment. That same day, Ray and Roy changed their pleas to guilty and also received life sentences. The outcome closed the criminal case without erasing the separate contributions behind it. Local officers preserved the scene. Railroad agents and postal inspectors assembled and followed the evidence. Heinrich interpreted key objects. Citizens recognized the posters. The solution belonged to a chain, not to a solitary detective. Newspapers called Heinrich the American Sherlock Holmes, a label that converted patient laboratory work into the image of a gifted individual. It was useful publicity for a private expert, but it also simplified the record. His observations about pitch, wood debris, documents, and handwriting could be photographed, compared, and challenged. Some of the more colorful profile details became prominent in later retellings and deserve more caution. Heinrich's importance does not require those embellishments. He made trace material intelligible to investigators and made technical evidence understandable in court. He also documented his work with unusual care. That combination helped establish the public idea of the criminalist, a scientist who moved between scene, laboratory, and witness chair. Heinrich continued consulting until his death on September 28, 1953, at the age of 72. In 1969, Heinrich's son Mortimer donated his papers to the Bancroft Library at the University of California, Berkeley. The collection, open for research in December 2018, spans nearly 150 linear feet. It contains correspondence, photographs, work diaries, case files, laboratory notes, and selected evidence. Those boxes return us to the overalls at Tunnel 13. Their stains supported an occupational inference. Their hidden receipts supplied a number. Postal files converted that number into a name. Millions of circulars carried the name until recognition produced arrests. The legend remembers an American Sherlock. The archive preserves something calmer and more useful, a sequence of objects, records, institutions, and people. A century later, the answer to the opening question survives because Heinrich kept his steps. The smallest scrap mattered, but the public record is what made it evidence.